Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time, not only being able to, in the past, having trained you and just knowing you as a client, but also you're like legitimately one of the strongest fucking people I know, straight up. Like strength to weight ratio for sure, but also just in the world of people that I know, I think that you're actually the strongest person. It maybe except JC and Chris, but
JC.
except JC and Chris, they're on a different planet. But what does strength even mean to you? What does it feel like to be that strong?
Oh man, it's funny because I feel like everything is relative, right? Like
Mhm.
it's only fun if you're setting goals and you're wanting to do more and get better. And so I don't know, I have good days and bad days. And
Yeah.
like today I was deadlifting and I felt like it was a bad day, because it's all relative. Um, but yeah, just I think when it feels really good, it's like the confidence to know that you can move whatever is on the bar. Like it might suck, it might hurt, but just feeling like prepared to do it. Like you've done all the legwork to be able to move it and to grind it out. Um, but yeah, I think it's one of those sort of like that adage, like it doesn't get any easier, you just get stronger.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is, it sounds really trite, but it's totally true because you never feel like, okay, like I've done X now, like that's it. Time to just like, hang up my belt and I'm done.
I was just talking to someone about that the other day because they're talking about how they feel themselves getting stronger because they've now been training for a while. And I think, especially in the beginning, I mean, if you think back to like when you started powerlifting, your improvements at the start are so huge because you're learning a new skill. And so just from getting better at the skill, you get so much stronger really quick. But they're like, at the same time, certain weights feel lighter, but everything's still tough. And I think that is like when you're someone like this is, now you've been doing this for so long. It's part of your life. Like you said in the email, it's a hobby. It's part of your lifestyle. To get from making progress and it being fun and exciting to like down the road now living this lifestyle and it being part of what you do, you've crossed that line so long ago where every day that you go in there and do something, it's going to be fucking hard every day. And how do you stay motivated to do that?
Honestly, I'm one of those weird people who really just loves training. Like I hate
Fair.
competing. Like I don't think competing's fun. I don't
why
think
why why is that?
I don't know. So I've done one powerlifting meet and I
Mhm.
was a nervous wreck. And it was to the point where my coach, JC, who was with me, he kind of saw how I reacted. And after that, he's like, okay, maybe not competing for a while is going to be okay for you
Right.
because it's just, I don't know. I think what I get my sort of like adrenaline and excitement from is really just moving the weight.
Mhm.
And even when I'm in the gym, I don't like it when there are people watching me lift. So, like, for whatever reason, under the pressure of it, I made the silliest mistakes, like, um, things that I would never do in training, like my butt coming up when I'm benching, or after I did a good squat that was, I think, a PR, then just like taking a step to re-rack before they told me to, like all these little mental mistakes.
Yeah.
And like that part I just hated. So, um, actually training and being in the gym, that's sort of like my like happy place and my time to zone out from like 5 or 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning. I don't have to think about work. I don't have to think about any other obligations. I can just, go in and want to die for 2 hours and come out and start my day.
People are going to hear that. They're like, what's wrong with these people? All these strong people are fucked up.
I think you have to be a little bit crazy to want to go in day out, day in and day out and do it, especially like when you're at that point where like I don't hit PRs very often these
Mhm.
days. It's not like the beginning where, every 2 or 3 weeks you're touching a new weight for the first time and it's amazing and it's so exciting. Like
Right.
I haven't hit my max squat in almost 2 years.
Isn't that crazy? I think about this all the time. And especially it goes back to what I was saying about clients earlier. Like you make these progress jumps in the beginning. When your weightlifting age is young, your progressions are massive because it's part of them are skill based, part of them are your body's like acclimating to what you're doing. It's it's recovering from the resistance. So it's making these really big strides. Same thing with runners. Like if you've never run and you start running, your mile time just drops and drops and drops. But if you look at peak runners, like if you look at the guys that are winning or females that are winning the New York Marathon or like going and competing in Kona and the Ironman, stuff like this, their percentage improvements over time are so marginal, if even. So maybe they did their fastest time and it was 15 years ago and they'll never touch that time again. But
Totally.
they still keep going every single day. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You like you said, you haven't hit your squat in 2 years, but you train 6 days a week.
Yeah, and I think it's also finding those sort of like small improvements that make it still feel worthwhile.
Mhm.
Like even if it's a rep PR or like a volume PR, or the first time I've ever touched a certain weight and my like RPE, my rate of perceived exertion, is much lower than it normally is.
Right.
All those little things still feel like improvement. Sometimes it's like, oh, on my walking lunges, I was able to lift these instead of four, and no one cares. Like literally no one cares except me and my coach. But it still feels like an improvement.
It is funny how and I always think about this because of social media. It's such an interesting medium, especially with its intersection in fitness, because it's fun to share accomplishments, right? So like if you're competing and you share the video of you competing, it's kind of fun. It's there is some gratification there. And then on the flip side of it, no one fucking cares. Literally no one cares at all. So you put something up and you're like giving yourself pats on the back. You're like, oh, that form was so good on that, or that felt so clean. And then it's just like crickets. Like no one cares what you're doing at all.
Or what's even worse, and I think this is probably something that women get more than men, it's like you post some like great video of like, oh, I did like this deadlift for 10 and blah, blah, blah. And then you have 3 comments and one's like, nice ass. Or
What's your, if you had to rank your, like, well, not rank them, but what's like the worst of the worst that comes out of this? Because you're right, like the intentions are so genuine and across the board, like putting up achievements or accomplishments, or maybe you feel really good that day and you're really happy with your body image and how you look, and so you post a photo and it's kind of for you, or maybe even your friend group, and forget that there's however many thousand people that interact with your account. What's like the worst of the worst that you come in contact?
I think the most irritating thing, and I've heard this from a lot of female lifters, is when it's always men, it's never women, who
Right.
really don't know very much about lifting or training or programming at all.
Oh, you
And
mean
they
like 90% of people in a gym?
93%.
93, yeah. Buffer, give or take.
And then they post something about your form. Like, oh, be careful arching your back. You're going to snap your whatever. And it's just, even if you think that, like, you should know enough to know that you don't know. So just
Also, just who's warranting that?
yeah.
No one's fucking asking you, man.
Yes.
And it's the same is true. I feel like every gym has like their mayor, that kind of just thinks that they're like the unwarranted go-to source for everything that no one cares about, and they just feel inclined to kind of give their incentives, or especially people that used to do stuff. Oh, I used to, and then name drop 4 or 5 different people that are prominent within the powerlifting world or the strength world, and maybe they did a seminar like 80 years ago with that person.
Yes.
And then they're giving comments and stuff. It's like, dude, just stay in your lane.
Yes.
Not everyone's at the gym because they want to talk to everybody. Some people are there to just get their work done.
Yes. Or you could have done 3 more reps of that. Exactly. That's why it's a 7 RPE, and that's what my coach programmed, and that's why I'm done.
How do you stay? I mean, you mentioned like you're someone who's always kind of working with a coach. I love working with coaches. Josh and I just did an episode about that. And even at like, because I would consider you as a lifter, like a high level lifter. I mean, I think that you're within accurate ranges to your actual percentages relative to what you can do. And that's a really, really hard place for a lot of people to get to, because it takes a long time. You have to lift consistently for a lot of years to actually know where you are on the spectrum of your capabilities. So how do you find the motivation to stay on a program, one, and how do you trust the person that you're working with?
So I guess question number one is having a coach. Like that helps with staying on a program, and sort of knowing what the goals are and asking questions. So I have been with the same coach since 2014, minus like maybe a 1 year hiatus, more or less, during COVID, a little over a year. JC, I met right after I did my first bodybuilding show. Yep. And there have been times where I trained with him in person 5 days a week. There have been times where, like right now, we're just training remotely. He's gone full remote. So that really helps. And also having someone who sees questions as you wanting to learn and understand rather than a challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
Some coaches, they want to give you a program and your nutrition and your macros or meal plan or whatever. And if you ask a question, it's like, well, I'm the coach and you're the athlete, so just follow this.
Right.
And that doesn't work for me, because I like to stay motivated. I need to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, you program these awful Bulgarian split squats with a front rack, kettlebell, whatever, like, this is terrible and I hate it. But if you tell me why it's part of my program, or why this is an exercise you chose, I get why it's valuable, and I'm going to suck it up and not complain and work through it and try to get better. So I think, yeah, part of that is just understanding the program.
I think that's a testament though too to an actual coach, like someone who, one, is confident in their abilities. Like I happen to know JC, and I've learned so much from him as a coworker, as someone who's able to train alongside him, and his wealth of knowledge is endless, and he lives a life too. That's the other thing. He's not just a dude who got a certification. He's set records. He trains as frequently, if not more, than his clients. So like when he says something, he's not the type of coach, and I don't think you would ever associate yourself with people that would be like this. He would never just put an exercise for exercise sake. And I think those are the coaches that get frustrated when they get questions, because they don't have a reason. There's no why behind their what. So someone asks and they're like, hey, I'm the trainer, you're the client. All that says to me is you just don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And so when you're tested or challenged, you don't have an answer for your client, which is, in my eyes, embarrassing. Like JC is just that, like, he's a man. The dude, he knows what he's talking about. He can envision your program from a macro perspective, zoom out, and then also take into account all the emotional aspects, which is I don't even know how to kind of bottle that up, like how valuable that is, because as the athlete or the person, you're just going to have bad days.
Yeah. And it's like knowing your individual athletes and sort of how they function. Like, we had a talk about this last week where I had a deadlift workout, and it was one of those days where you come into the gym and you just feel like everything's working. And, I always like to film my singles and some of my sets, just because sometimes like how it feels doesn't line up with how it looks. So I might feel totally fatigued, and I look at my video, see that it actually moved really fast and it looked really easy. It's like, okay, then I need to just suck it up, put on more weight, and keep going. But I was having one of those days where everything felt good. And like, it was, it probably wouldn't have been a day that I could have gone for a PR. And so I was programmed to do something at like a relatively easy RPE for a single. And I was like, you know what? It feels really good. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to, 5 pounds off my PR. And it moved really well and it felt great. And after that, JC kind of said like, okay, those days where it's really feeling on, I want you to go for it, take advantage of it, because there are going to be just as many days where it's feeling way off and you're nowhere near the weight you should hit. Yep. So, whether it's going for a volume PR and, doing an extra 15 pounds for your set of 5, or if it's, hitting a single that's closer to your PR, just do it, because you got to get used to moving those heavier weights and just sort of like not shortchanging yourself.
For sure.
I don't know that he'd say that to every client, but he sort of knows me and how my body works and the ups and downs, and also that like when I'm in a lifting rut, I need that confidence of being able to move weight. So
I think that too, when you have a relationship with a client and you've known them, it's one of the special things about being able to train people for a long time is you start to understand their psyche, one. So like he can see the value in you getting extra reps to feel good about it. outweighs like the very low potential risk, for example, or in the event that, you're not worried that someone's going to stop training for their own sake. So you can program things smart and go, okay, we're not feeling 100%. We shouldn't push it 100%. If you come in and you're feeling like a 6 out of 10, there's a lot of other things that you can focus on that day, except hitting the absolute number that is in the cell box. Like, but when you start or when you're new to training, you feel so obligated to do the program exactly how it's done. But it's just like, it's architects and houses. Like, you design a house, you build the blueprint, you go to dig and you find out that there's a bunch of rocks under the ground that you didn't expect to be there. And now you got to completely overhaul how the foundation's built. And that's exactly how a strength training program is. You come in it with the best intentions and a very specific outline, but life happens. Maybe one day you come in, your wrist is totally jacked up for no reason other than it just is. How do you work around that? Does it stop your whole day of training? No. And does it ruin the whole trajectory of your program? No. But when you don't have someone there to talk about it, it can be really frustrating.
Yes.
Like, oh, my wrist is messed up, I'm never going to get strong again.
Yeah. Or even like, I don't know, maybe all the squat racks are taken on Tuesday and you have to do something else first. That to me is, honestly, I feel like that ruins my whole morning if I have to like switch the order of things. But also, like, I'm not a professional athlete. I try to play an athlete on Instagram. This is literally my hobby. And like, the world's not going to end because I had to do walking lunges before I did my squats today. So it's also,
I always love that about, like, I mean, you're a, super consistent, hyper consistent person. I think everyone at that 5 o'clock to 6 a.m., people that are getting there and doing their training at that hour, you never see a group of people more consistent. You never see a group of people more, even if they're not on like a specific program like you, they're on some sort of program. No one's walking in at 5 a.m. and just kind of throwing stuff around for no reason. So it's a special group of people, and it's reserved for those willing to wake up at 4 or 4:30 to get it done, because you don't just walk in the door and start lifting either. With you having been at Equinox, now you're in Huntington Beach, traveling to Tulum, Costa Rica, and then I just happen to know that you travel the hell out of the whole world. So you're seeing probably more gyms globally than anyone I know. Do you always try to find that same time? Do you find similar minded people all around the world at that same hour?
yes. Simply.
So rad.
I'm a morning person, like through and through. So for me, sort of my workout in the morning sets the tone for my whole day.
Yeah.
Even when I'm traveling, even when, I have to deal with like time differences because I'm trying to get work done back at home on California time, I still try to get it in first thing. And, it's sort of like exactly what you said. It's people speaking a different language, looking totally different. Maybe they have different equipment and the plates have, a different brand name on them, but you can sort of recognize that same mentality of, I'm somewhere for a week and I see the same 20 people who are there in that like 5 to 6:30 slot, 5 out of the 7 days. So I think that sort of helps. Like, I definitely do feed off the energy of going to the gym. So the COVID lockdown training in my garage was really hard for me. I became that person who posted every single workout on Instagram because that was the only way that I could sort of like, I don't know, like A, stay motivated, but B, get that feedback and feel like I was still part of a community that was training. And it's like, again, no one cares about my walking lunges and calf raises, but like, I feel like I'm, at least interacting with other gym and fitness people. And that was something that I really missed. But, like you said, it's sort of like a lifestyle and a hobby thing. So when I train or when I travel, it's like one of the first things I look for is like, okay, this is my hotel or my Airbnb. Is there a decent gym nearby? Because I'm not going to feel 100% if I can't at least get in a few good workouts during that week or 5 days or whatever it is.
I always think it's fun because in a way, it's like you're part of this secret club that has no membership and no place to go to like sign up or pay your dues. It's just Dom from the gym. So he always posts these things like when we were working out, it would be like 6 a.m. club, like what's up? and it's just him like training at 6 a.m. And we would always laugh about it, but at the same time, it's kind of cool. It is. There's this global 5 a.m. club. There's this group of people all around the world that don't know each other that train at 5 a.m. And it's very, very different than people that train in the afternoon from a mentality standpoint, but also to what you said, it sets the tone for your day. It's the very first interactions with other humans. It's the first hour that you're awake. And the very, very special thing about it is that it precedes the beginning of a work day in most cases. Obviously, there's changes to that. But taking that time before the stresses of work, life, calls, meetings, travel, all that shit starts to happen, starting the day dedicating time to yourself and like the betterment of you, your body, your longevity, I think that that is the coolest thing. And that's why it's so easy to connect with those people.
I love it. At the same time, I also do realize that it's a privilege because, like,
True.
I'm single, I don't have kids, I don't have, elderly parents I'm taking care of. I'm not having to like wake up with the baby 5 times throughout the night or like get kids ready for school at 6:30. So like it's part of my lifestyle. Is it feasible for everyone? No. But if it is, do I recommend it 100%? Because, it's sort of like no matter what, I know I'm going to get this end today. No matter what happens at work, no matter, what I have to do in the afternoon, or if my dog gets loose, or, my kids get sent home from school, like I've gotten this done. But again, not everyone can do it. And especially in sports and fitness, I've often thought about like when I'm in super busy periods at work, right? And I'm working like 12-hour days and it sucks, but I can still get my training in. I can still, get a moderate amount of sleep and get my meals together and do all my stuff. But I'm thinking like, what if I also had to take 2 hours out of my day to pick my kids up and run them back and forth? And, or what if I had elderly parents I had to take care of, or if I have to keep little humans alive and cook their food and do these other things, like, and also just be a person and a parent, or a child who's caring for my parents, or someone who's there. Like I like it works for my lifestyle, but I think we also sometimes don't give enough consideration to all of the other priorities in people's lives.
And ever more true at like somewhere like Equinox, right? Because you're surrounded by people that have nannies, assistants, the means to take time out of the day. I don't actually think about that specifically a lot, but I do think about how valuable the ability to do that is to me personally, like how much I value my health and fitness, and knowing what I know about its impact on my longevity is like, it really kind of screws it in. And when I got my dog, it totally fucked me up, like real bad. Like that now he's the shit. But when we got him, that was my first experience as an adult of waking up in the middle of the night for something that you're like trying to keep alive, that you don't want to get sick or hurt or feel pain or whatever. And again, this is like a dog, right? It's not my kid. And those 3 months, like I was, of course, nerding out. I was like tracking my sleep on my watch and assessing it on my phone. And like, I'm like, oh my God, my sleep's down 35% when I have a pet, and like doing all these dumb inferences. But it totally threw me sideways completely, like spinning out. It affected my mood, affected seemingly my health, my mental health for sure. There were multiple days where I thought about bringing him back. Like I was like, there's no way I can handle this. And then I was like, wow, that's 3 months with a dog I chose to go get with no other responsibilities at all, while working from home through a pandemic when there's not, there was no reason to really go out and be out and about. And that was the first time that I really thought about everything you're saying. I'm like, damn, some people, maybe it's not that they don't want to or don't care. They actually can't.
Yeah, and I think it is about priorities. Like, I think we've all heard that thing where, next time you say I don't have time, you should say it's not a priority and see how that goes
100%.
with you. And like, I don't know, I feel like it's pretty okay to say, you know what, it's not a priority for me to work out 5 times this week when I have these 100 other things that I really need to do for people I love and, things that are important, like that's okay. If it's not a priority because I really want to finish watching Squid Game on Netflix, like, maybe you feel
Season 2 booked, by the way.
I haven't seen season 1. I know.
Podcast over. All right, we don't have much to talk about. No. It's a special ability to be able to do this and to find the time and to find the community that supports it. Do you feel like, though, I can't picture if you had a child you're taking care of, or if your job got more demanding, I feel like you just start waking up at 3. Like, how much of this is part of your mental well-being at this point, to be honest?
Honestly, a lot of it. Because even on vacation and that sort of thing, like even when work is really nuts, and I'm not saying this is the healthiest thing, but there definitely are times where it's like, okay, I either am going to get 2 hours less of sleep, which is not good. Because let's say
Right.
I'm already at like, okay, so I'll either, sleep 4.5, 5 hours and get my workout in, or get 6.5, 7 hours of sleep and skip my workout. I almost always will choose less sleep and getting my workout in.
Right.
Just makes me feel better and happier overall. But like in terms of overall health, is that the best decision? Maybe not. Like I know sleep is important. I know doing that more than one consecutive night is definitely not smart.
Well,
But
definitely at your level too. Like if you have consecutive missed recovery time, basically is what it comes down to. Your body's ability to perform is just diminishing at some level.
oh, it's the worst. And I'm like, because I'm such a morning person, like when I'm working with people who are evening people, especially if they're like, bosses or whatever, I just like fall apart. It's like headaches and my eyes feel blurry. And I made I don't know if it was like a brilliant decision or the dumbest decision I've ever made a couple weeks ago to go to Dublin for the week.
Greatest decision.
Like I'm working remotely. I had to like make some concessions at work to be able to be remote like full time forever. So if I don't take advantage of that, then like, is it even worth what I had to give up for it?
Right.
So I was like, you know what? I don't have any client meetings. I don't have any court appearances. I'm just going to go to Dublin for the week, and I'll be a tourist earlier in the day. And then I'll, log on in the afternoon, get my work done, work through the evening. It'll be great.
Yeah.
So I'm 37. When I was like 25, that probably would have been great for a week. At 37, it was great for 2 days. And then by like 10 o'clock at night, when I'm still like, working on documents and I'm looking at my clock and seeing I have a good 3 hours of work ahead of me, it's like, okay, this was a terrible idea.
It just adds up so quick.
It was, oh my God.
I think
I'll do it again, to be
part
clear.
of it is like, if you're a performance-based person, like people that complain about sleep the least are usually like the least healthy, because you're not even aware of the impact it can have on what you're doing, because you're not really testing the limits of what your recovery is doing for you. But if you're training 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and you have like programmed percentages of intensity of what you're supposed to do, when you touch the bar and it just feels heavier, and that's a huge correlation to sleep and your body's ability to recover. So I almost feel like the consistent training and the constant like trying to push your limits and do stuff, it's a blessing and a curse, only in that you really do feel like when you're behind. And then that athlete, I call it athlete mindset, but it just kicks in a little bit because you feel the frustration all of a sudden, because that something you did is now preventing you from pursuing what you want to pursue. So I do this to myself all the time. I feel like all week long, I'm just walking around, just shooting myself in the foot left and right. Like, I'm like, oh my God, the surf's good. So I'll go surf. And then that night I train jujitsu. And the next day I wake up and I strength train. I do this for like 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden it's like my hip flexor, my low back, everything's all jacked up. Then I'm overtrained. I can't sleep. And because I can't sleep, I'm not recovering. And then the next day, all those things suffer. And then I'm like, I'm not getting better at this. I'm not getting better at that. I can't sleep. And it's like a vicious cycle. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't know how good I can feel.
Yes. I was thinking about that during, like, with COVID, and there were some, I think there were like football players, young male athletes who were having like certain heart conditions and things like
Mhm.
that were sort of lingering effects. And I remember thinking at the time, like, they can't be the only people who are experiencing that, but because they're so attuned to how they should be
Yes.
performing and how their bodies actually feel, like, they're noticing the difference. There's, probably a million people who are having some sort of impact, but, if your life is fairly sedentary and your heart rate really gets above 120, you really have no reason to notice.
Right. It's not going to stick out.
Yeah.
What was it like when I mean, I say when Equinox closed, but that's not really what I'm getting at. But when, one day you go in, you have this training facility, this community, this group of people. Pandemic was obviously a big impact for everybody. But what did it feel like when that rug was pulled out from under you? And so much of your well-being and your mind state and your mental attitude all hinges on this habit that you have in your life.
Honestly, it was tough. I think the first 2 or 3 weeks, no one knew how long it was going to last.
Right.
I remember taking bets with my coworkers. This was like second week of March, and we were saying, like, do you think things will be closed till May? Like, I don't know. It could be the
I know
whole
in
summer.
hindsight.
Hindsight. But yeah, so in the beginning, it was sort of this sort of weird, like, fun feeling where everything's a little bit different, and we're all filming our workouts in the park where you're using water jugs for weights. And you remember that? Like, it was.
Yeah,
I
it was
remember doing
great.
stupid Instagram video on, like, making, like, shoving water bottles in a backpack or something to do curls, and like, at the
No,
time.
no one's craziness was magnified more than like the fitness community.
Yeah.
People that were like gym goers were like, oh my God, these people, I thought they were crazy. They're fucking insane.
Oh my God, it was nuts. And yeah, but it was super fun. We're all waiting for our workout equipment to be delivered on Amazon or
Oh my
whatnot.
God, that was a disaster.
It was
Disaster.
terrible. I was fortunate that the very first day everything closed, I went online and bought a set of the Bowflex adjustable
Yep.
dumbbells that go up to like 55 pounds or something. And that was before the prices got super crazy. So I literally bought them. I think it was the last day the gyms were open. And then, collected a garage full of stuff. Like, this guy I was seeing at the time gave me a 24 kg kettlebell and 32 maybe. And then, like, I bought a bunch of bands from
You're like,
TJ.
all right, now we're done. Bye.
Funny story about that. Yeah, we were a little bit done, and then he
Yeah.
ended up having to come pick them up from my garage like a year and a half.
Oh no.
It's fine. It's
Oh,
fine. Yeah, but I think, I mean, it was hard. That's why I turn to social media a lot more than I had
mhm.
before with the challenges people were posting every day. And it was just kind of a way to stay engaged. It was, I mean, honestly, I'm not a person who loves doing tons and tons of volume,
Mhm.
but, like, when you're used to lifting heavy weights and the heaviest thing you have is a pair of 55-pound dumbbells, you end up doing lots and lots of reps.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I never in my life again have to do sets of 20 tempo RDLs with dumbbells, I will be totally okay with that.
It definitely brought like a different degree. Well, it did a lot of things. One, it brought the virtual space front and center. So now, even if you look at your situation, Jake sees 100% remote. You're still training with him. Um, my entire business, for example, is virtual entirely. It's been that way for over a year and a half. And at the beginning, it was weird. Now I love it because I have time to do things like this. I have time to do things I've always wanted to do that I couldn't have because you have the travel time to and from. Your downtime's kind of weird because you can't really leave, but you can't really stay. And it made that okay. Like, no one would have, if I had ever told you that we were going to do a virtual session pre-pandemic, you'd been like, you're out of your fucking mind. I'm not going to like just sit with my phone there. No one would do it. And it also brought versatility. It showed like, hey, when you're down and out and you're in some crazy place you've never been before, or you go to a hotel gym and there's a fraction of the equipment that you're used to, there's things to do. And there's ways to stay progressive, and there's ways to challenge your muscles, and there's ways to stay active without feeling like here comes another like hotel mobility session. So it was really fun to watch. I mean, it's an interesting community because everyone knows each other so well from there. And it was fun to watch everyone adopt their own little version of at-home training. Like you're doing get-ups with your Bowflex dumbbells on your like porch at your place in Santa Monica. And you go down Palisades Park and everyone's out there doing outside workouts when they would never have done that before. It was so cool seeing that.
I think the other thing that was interesting for a lot of my friends who are trainers and coaches, like if you've only been on the client side, which is, like me, but I've been fortunate enough to get the perspective from friends of mine, like it's a really physical job. So just, lifting weights day in and day out, spotting people day in and day out, being on your feet for that many hours, and then also trying to get in your own training and still feel like, you're performing at your best. It's a big difference, being able to train people remotely and still like have a little more time for yourself.
Yep.
So I've been told.
Well, it was your output just from steps is pretty high. It's higher than you think it is when especially if like you're doing long days like JC and I were. I mean, you're there for 10 hours, 11 hours a day, going up and down all the flight of stairs. 10 clients in a day times however many exercises, all the equipment you move. Your baseline expenditure is through the roof. Then you do your training. And it's funny because training people virtually, they're all sitting in their houses with their home gym, stuff like that. And they're like, man, I'm tired. I got to move all the weights for myself. And I'm sitting back here like, I know.
You're like, get that knee up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I miss in-person training or being trained in person. There's something like kind of fun about the energy of it. But in terms of just like versatility, I think I don't see sort of online training and virtual training being something that's going anywhere.
Yeah, I think it stays.
Yeah.
Did your nutrition change at all from going in a gym to at home?
Not really. In the beginning, when we were all like, caged rats, I was running a lot more. So the first thing I noticed when I moved to at home, because I had less weight, I had to sort of compensate with things like tempo and volume, shorter rest periods to like keep the intensity up. And so at that time, I was working with a different coach, Michelle McDonald. She and her husband have a gym down in Tulum. And they coach a lot of like WBFF bodybuilding athletes and other folks.
What the crazy one with all the wood stuff that everyone goes?
That one is in Tulum, but their gym is like a normal, just powerlifting.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Gym, which I recommend everyone check out if they go down there. But yeah, so working with them, I had a lot more volume in my workouts just to sort of like keep the intensity level up. But I was also in the beginning probably running 4 or 5 miles a day. Damn. And just like the first month of lockdown, I dropped probably a few pounds without like keeping everything the same, and I was starving. So I had sort of set nutrition and macros. I was going over it every day, and I was still like dropping weight. So I still tracked macros. I was still pretty consistent about everything, but I actually ended up having to increase my food to compensate for all of the cardio, because that was the only excuse I had to, get out of the square block around my apartment on a daily basis.
Right.
But then as I slowly started to cut back on the cardio, like I absconded to Tulum for several months and was back at a normal gym and that sort of thing. I, went on a build for a little bit. I focused on strength for a while. I did a cut for a photo shoot at one point. So it was a little bit all over the board.
What was the vibe like in Tulum? Because you're not the first person I know that kind of pandemic hit and they're like, fuck it, I'm going to Mexico. And like, there were a lot of visits to Tulum and it kind of seemed like it turned into this hotspot.
Yeah. So I went initially, I'd gone for a week just to sort of get away. Because I live by myself in this tiny little apartment with my dog in Santa Monica. My office has been closed. I realized at some point in like maybe June that I hadn't like sat down and had a meal with another person in like 3 months. and it was just killing me.
Yeah.
So I went down there for a week and was able to train. Like they have a private gym, so I was able to sort of train alone in their gym. Everything was outdoors, so it was great. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to come down here for 2 months just to sort of get away. I'll bring my work. I'm working remotely, so no one cares. I can actually train and just get a little bit of a break. So that's why I came down. I ended up staying for like 8 months because I just
Oh
kept
God.
pushing it out and pushing it out. But it was weird because you had some people who kind of did what I did. I made a few friends who sort of had the same mentality. It's like, I'm staying by myself, working from my kitchen table. I might as well find a better kitchen table to work from.
Right.
And because pretty much everything's outside, things were more open. So you didn't feel quite as like anxious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was also this whole group of people who sort of went down really to party. So there were like jungle parties and beach clubs and
Just super spreader events left and right.
yeah, we are still in a pandemic, people. Like, are you kidding? Yeah, so there's a little bit of that. I remember at one point, a friend of mine who owns the Tulum Jungle Gym, she had heard, she'd been contacted by someone from, I don't know if it was like CNN or BBC, one of the networks, and they wanted to talk to some people who'd come to Tulum from the States and talk to them about why. So we did an initial interview. I did, and my friend Courtney, and it was very clear that they were expecting us to be sort of like anti-masker, COVID is fake, I have natural immunity, and that's why I came here. I want my freedom. And we were like, yeah, we always have our masks with us in case we need them. We're mostly outside. We don't really go to indoor events. And like, they were clearly so disappointed with that answer. They never called us back for the follow-up.
They like thought they were going to talk to the rebels.
Yeah. So, there were all kinds, but I am really glad I did it. Because the isolation for me was super hard. Just not seeing any of my friends, not being, with any of my coworkers, and like living by yourself too. It's just, I'm not that introverted.
It's funny because I've always considered, like, I'm an independent person for sure, and I'm not an introvert. Like, I definitely enjoy other people and being outgoing and stuff like that. But when the pandemic happened, obviously Lauren and I lived together, so I didn't know otherwise. We were just, it was like, oh well, now we're just home all the time together. I did not understand the value, and I didn't understand it for a while because it took a little bit where everyone's kind of like, at the beginning it was almost fun. It was almost like, oh cool, I don't have to go to work anymore. I do it. I'm working out at home. And then it hit this point. It's like, oh my God, we might be in this for the long haul. And I just never really thought about what it would have been like to be alone during that time. And I didn't experience it from that lens. And I can only imagine, it sounds like what you're saying is like, introvert or not, we're social beings. Having interaction, especially you think about like the community equinox, for example, even though you're going in the morning to do your own thing, it's kind of nice to see the same people and say what's up and just feel like that, just kind of energy being around other people. Doesn't mean you have to sit down and have a chat with them all the time, but that energy of being around others. And I think the pandemic really showed that value across the board.
Totally. Like, even in the beginning when things first shut down, and so I was living in Santa Monica, and pretty much everything was closed. I think there were a handful of coffee shops that were open for like maybe curbside service. And so it was funny to see how quickly people develop new routines, because
Yeah.
within 2 weeks, I like had my morning run that I did, my like same route
Yeah.
that I would vary maybe like a block here or there. I would go to my coffee shop on Montana Avenue. There'd be the same 10 people in line, socially distanced in their masks around the block, waiting to get their coffee. You'd have, your little conversation and chat. And everyone seemed to want to somehow get back to some semblance of like, this is normal and this is my life and this is what I do. Even though there was nothing normal about it,
Nothing.
So
It's so weird thinking back to that. Like, I remember when the rioting and stuff was happening in Santa Monica. I mean, you and I probably lived like a couple blocks from each other. We're like right on Second. I remember, and it was so like surreal. We were sitting, so we were eating like to-go food in our apartment on Second Street, and I'm watching a live stream of like every fucking business that you and I walk by every single day on the way to the gym. Patagonia, the little sushi place on the corner, REI, like that whole strip right there. And I'm just watching people running in through broken windows and running out with clothes. And I'm like, no way this is a block away right now. It just didn't even register that was actually happening. And then the next day we went and walked around and it was like, oh my God, this is fucked. And still not recovered.
And you're like, is this really the National Guard outside of Nordstrom? Yes, it is. And
it just looked like a movie.
It was nuts. It was, I mean, even the graffiti and everything else. And I remember like when I was trying to cross like Ocean or somewhere around there where all the National Guard guys were stationed. And this guy's like, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you can't go past there. You have to walk around. I'm really sorry. And I see these guys and they're just kids. They're like 18, 19, 20. And most of them were Latino or Black. I'm like, there's just no way that you guys thought that you were the people who were sent in to deal with this.
Oh, I mean, everyone, every police officer, every National Guard member, they all looked like fish out of water. It looked like, almost as if everyone had signed up just thinking they would never get the call. And then you get the call and you're sent into this weird, completely out of this world experience that I mean, it's really hard to explain how crazy Santa Monica was during that like week and a half to someone that doesn't live there, who didn't experience it the week before, how different it was.
But I think you're right too, that it hasn't come back. Like, I mean, that was part of why I moved, and I don't know what your motivations were for moving, but even when I finally came back in, I think June, it just felt different. The vibe was different. So many businesses hadn't recovered, had closed and never reopened. Santa Monica has always had a lot of homeless folks, but it was to the point where like whatever the city tried to do during the pandemic, those efforts were not effective. My personal opinion is that they focused a lot more on trying to stop neighbors from complaining than they did about finding permanent solutions to the problem for folks who are experiencing homelessness, but that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
But, like I live right next to a park where there were regularly a couple hundred people who were camping there. Some of them, down on their luck, some of them with a lot of like serious drug and mental health issues and all sorts of other things that just aren't being addressed. And I'm like, all right, well, this is a vastly different city.
It did feel, it truly felt, it just felt different. Like you kind of think that it would, but it really did. And I remember having very similar things. It was, I'd been in LA for almost 10 years, and Lauren was from here. So we always came down, visited San Diego, and it was like an idea to come down here eventually. But it was just like kind of the perfect storm, and everything came to a head. And was like, after a couple months there, for like March, April, May, June, by June, it really did feel like a different place. Everything that you're saying, like the concentration of homelessness in Santa Monica, it was stark. It was noticeably different. It was not like there was a problem that was out of control. It was almost like everyone got brought there. It really felt like that. And everything the whole vibe there was different. It felt so weird. And we came down and then we're like, I think it's just time to like move, go do something else. The LA it's interesting. The homeless problem is such a complex, and I'd actually love to get your opinion or like insights on this from like the legal side too. It's such an interesting and complex, extremely complex problem, because to your point earlier, it's a mix of reasons with which they're there. It's not just because they don't want a job. It's mental health, it's drug use, but to the nth degree, like bad, where you're looking out and you're not seeing the world, you're seeing whatever is going on in your head projected. It's the loss of jobs. Then there's these weird city ordinances where they are limited in their ability to, I guess, correct or try to aid the situation. So it's almost like a petri dish to just create more and worse versions of homelessness everywhere in the city.
Yeah, I think it's all those things. I think it's also like, the rent is too damn high. I mean, it just is. Like when you look at housing costs in California and the percentage of people's income that they spend on housing, it's insane. And like
Yeah,
LA has a lot of wealth, but as a big city, LA is not a wealthy city. It's a relatively like poor city because there's such a huge disparity.
right.
So, I think that's a huge problem as well. And we all get into a bit of NIMBYism, like we're kind of getting into it, right now. And when people become homeowners, it gets even worse. Like no one wants their property value to go down because there's affordable housing built next door or because these
Right.
zoning ordinances change. Um, I think the other thing people forget is like what we see in the parks. That's the homelessness that we see, right? There's so many people, especially families, who are living in cars or crashing on couches of friends, and like, kids who are in their principal's office every day after school calling their parents to figure out where they're going to go after school for that night. So I think, it's a much bigger problem than what we even see. And I wish I knew what the solution is, but like, at least part of it, especially when you look at California and all of the like very expensive cities in California that have massive homelessness problems, it's hard to think that some of it, at least a large part of it, has to do with housing prices and the lack of affordable housing. And it's only been made worse during the pandemic because construction was at such a low for so long. In the beginning, when we didn't really know what was going to happen and if there was going to be a recession, and this housing crunch that people feel is just trickling down.
Right.
So
And you bring up an interesting point too with it's like you don't want affordable housing built next to your home because you don't want the value of your property to go down, but you also don't not want it near your house because you don't want people that are homeless with no place to stay in your front yard driving down the value of your property because the neighborhood value is now down.
yeah, and there's just the question of like, I don't know what's good for me individually versus what's good for society.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't mind paying taxes because I think they serve a purpose, right?
Right.
Like I'm not a homeowner, so it's probably easier for me to say like, I do think there should be more affordable housing because, yeah, there are lots of problems with homelessness and all the other issues that come with that, but also like people should have a place to live, like it's not too much to ask that most people are housed. And I don't know if you've had friends visit from other countries, but they're always floored at the amount of homelessness in the US and also, in big cities in particular. And just the fact that people sort of disregard it like it's nothing. So like,
It definitely is viewed, I feel like, and part of this is because of the emotion tied to it, because you can get riled up when you're walking to Erewhon and you look over and there's like 15 campers and a bunch of tents occupying the street. And then the people that are living there are also in the face of and shouting at or in some cases attacking people that are just walking by. You can get charged up about it and angry at the problem. But on the flip side of that coin, everyone's doing the best with what they have, for sure. People that are living in campers on the side of the road in Venice don't want to be doing that. Like deep down, maybe there are some that do, but like at the core of it, I would imagine they would wish that they were better off.
right.
So part of it is that there aren't avenues to get out of that, and you're also disregarded by society as a problem. So it's people just they don't look at and see a human, they just see a problem that they wish wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, I think, we have this like rugged American individualism that's
Mhm.
like, know, if your circumstances are poor, it's because you didn't work hard enough or you did something wrong, and that's why. And I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna sound like a, you know, stereotypical lefty, and that's fine. Um, but you know, it's ridiculous that we're in one of the richest countries in the world, if not the richest, and my dog is pawing at her food bowl. But it's crazy that we're in one of the richest countries in the world and we have the amount of wealth disparity that we have. Like if you look at the Gini index, the US compared to every other rich Western nation, we're way below. We're like more or less in line with countries in like some parts of Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa in terms of wealth disparity, which as one of the richest countries in the world and a democracy is not really where you want to be. But we've come to see that as normal and acceptable. And it manifests itself in things like, you know, me parking my Audi next to people who are in tents in front of Whole Foods.
Right.
Like, yeah. So
how do you think we climb out of that situation?
Oh my God, I wish I knew. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Because it seems like it's the disparity is growing larger and larger. It doesn't look like there's a turnaround point there. And it also doesn't look like on the high side that there's much incentive or desire to trickle down. And then there's part of me that believes in like meritocracy. And I get hung up on this sometimes because it goes back to what you were saying earlier, where they're like, you know, you kind of look at these people and you go, well, they just didn't try hard enough, or they're foregoing opportunities to do what they want, and doing what you want doesn't always get you the best outcomes. And so they could have chosen things differently. And surely there's some situations where that's true, but even having that mindset sometimes, I don't know if that's the most serving mindset, because it's not reality for a lot of people. It isn't as simple as just teach the homeless guy how to work harder and he'll be a harder worker and then he won't be homeless.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's certainly not a solution when we live in a country where like the single biggest determinant of your socioeconomic status is the wealth of your father. You know, like there was this great article called something like "The American Dream is Alive and Well in Sweden." And it basically was talking about this whole idea of pulling yourself up from your bootstraps and, you know, it's economic mobility and how it's really become a myth. And there's very little upward economic mobility at all in the US. And the places where you do tend to see it are Northern and Western Europe more so. So yeah, I think we have this myth of meritocracy, and if you work hard, anything is possible. And like as Americans, we love to point to the many examples, and there are many examples of people who have managed to do that, but we look at them like they are typical, right, or like they're representative of most people's experiences, and they're not. In a country of 350 million people, it's not hard to find a couple dozen who buck the trend.
Right.
But yeah, it's
perhaps there's like maybe like a middle ground. It definitely is interesting when you consider the size of the nation, and then yeah, you find a couple, maybe not even a couple, maybe you find thousands of stories, hundreds of thousands, even stories of people that have climbed their way up out of adversity and created something for themselves, and now they're disproportionately successful to where they started. But even then, you know, what's 450,000 to 350 million? I mean, it's even at that many success stories with that many professional athletes, with that many entrepreneurs, it's still so unlikely. But you don't want to take that hope away from people and the drive, I feel like, either.
That just reminded me of this phrase, and I'm trying to remember who said it. It might have been Clarence Thomas, which I hope it wasn't, but I don't recall off my head. the soft bigotry of low expectations. Which is, I mean, I think that's a valid point. I think there's a difference between saying like there are examples of people who have done this and it's not impossible versus saying like, this is the norm, and if you don't achieve it, it's because of your own personal failings and you personally did something wrong. So I don't know. I mean, I think we do have a tendency to over individualize failures and successes. Like we look at these like people who are considered to be geniuses in business or tech or whatever it is, and no one looks at like, it's great that Jeff Bezos has made, all of the money, but at the same time, like, okay, how many thousands of workers did it take for you to be able to do this? Or even like, Walmart, you look at the Waltons, it's the biggest employer in the US, but how many of their employees are on public assistance because the wages that they've been paid are not enough to actually really support,
A lifestyle.
or
I always have, or maybe talk me through this, because so I always have I think about this stuff a lot, and like think about it, meaning I just consider it a lot, but I haven't really thought through it a lot. Like I find people like Elon Musk, for example, fascinating, and I think that in the like geological time scale of our societies and existence, you need people like that are thinking on the level that he's thinking on for scientific advancement and progression of like a species. So on like a very macro thing, I think that people like Elon Musk are good. Then you look at on the more granular side, like the wealth disparity, like the guy's got so much freaking money. I mean, then you see what I find is like hilarious little tidbits, or someone's like, oh, if Elon Musk just gave $1 to every single person in the world, every person in the world would have $1 million, or stuff like that. And I kind of laugh at it because it takes different things to get to different places. And I don't think that the world would be better off if Elon Musk was not being who he is. But there is so much wealth disparity up towards the top percentage of wealth in the world. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to think about that beyond the fact that I think that those people are good for the progression of existing people.
Yeah, I guess one way to think of it is like, is an Elon Musk any more good for society than like, I don't know, a Thomas Edison, however many years ago? I'm like, okay, probably not. Okay. But, the disparity between what Elon Musk is making versus the median employee is like 10,000 to 1, versus the disparity between these like people that we saw as like the robber barons of the past. Maybe it was 500 to 1, and that was still considered grossly overpaid and grossly out of line with American values.
Right.
So like, I don't know how we got to this point where like that big of a disparity is acceptable.
Yeah.
And this idea that like, if we don't allow people to have that big of a disparity, then they just won't innovate because it won't be worth it to them. Like, I think that part is BS.
Which couldn't be any more true with Elon, because I mean, the guy lives in like a tiny house. I mean, he like, it's just for someone like him, for example, I think that you're correct. He take all the money away. He's wired that he's going to keep doing that, right? Like he's going to keep wanting to innovate on that level because his brain thinks that way.
And I mean, at a certain point, the money is just a way of keeping score, right? And which isn't to say that like, yeah, you should be rewarded if you build a massive company or make, major innovations and make people's lives better. But like, to what degree and how much is enough and how much is just, ridiculous.
But then how much also, okay, so outside of, we'll call it like the upper 1% of the global population in wealth, how much of that also falls on individuals like us, right? Because I could, point to you, for example, as a lawyer, make a great living, make significantly better of a living than probably 98% of the people in the country. So whatever the solution is at the top level in terms of redistribution of wealth or like trickle down compensation to disperse that, should that also be applied to you in your situation or no?
Yeah, that's why we have taxes, and
Fair.
and in all fairness, I'm probably taxed significantly more than like, the top 0.1% or like
Right.
what I'm paying actual taxes. Um, but I think there's also a question of like how those taxes are used and whether it's effective and whether it's actually redistributive,
Hmm.
and like it reflects our values in certain ways. So things that like, mortgage interest deductions, they're great, but they also advantage a part of the population that for the most part is already pretty advantaged, right? So like,
Gotcha. Yeah.
there's things like increasing gasoline taxes. That is a regressive tax because it has the biggest negative impact on people who have the fewest resources and spend the
Right.
largest, part of their income on that. Yeah. So I mean, I'm a lefty through and through, and so I think
Right.
responsibilities should go to government. Um, we live in a big and diverse enough country that it's difficult. Like we're not Sweden, where you have 10 million people, and it's easy to have people pay insane amount of taxes, but get a very high standard of living in return for it. It's not as easy to do on a massive scale with over 300 million citizens, but I also don't think that the solution is to have like, the Bill and Melinda Gateses of the world determining how, like what all of the priorities are for helping those who are the least fortunate. Like, to
Right.
be fair, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does a lot of great things. And in a lot of ways, I agree with what a lot of their priorities are. But at the same time, I find something to be very disturbing about like letting a handful of gazillionaires determine what the priorities should be for helping those who need help versus like democratically elected governments doing it. That just seems weird to me.
Do you, as someone who's like a proclaimed hardcore left person, do you find yourself at conflict with friends of yours that are conservative? Do you have friends that are conservative? Or I think right now it's such obviously the polarity in this country is ever present, right? Like it is so clear that there's division within the country on a political standpoint. But I've always felt like despite whatever my views are, I'm always interested in what the opposite viewpoint has to say, just out of curiosity in the event that, which is high, I might be wrong. And so I also think it's really important, just as a society or as someone in a community or neighborhood, to talk to people that might not agree with you 100%. So even with your values where they are, and I can imagine within the legal system, your exposure to people that are probably far on the other side of the spectrum is consistent. So how do you like allow yourself to exist amongst people with opposing views? And then what incentives do you feel like you have to listen to what they have to say, so to speak?
I think it's hard. It's probably harder than ever now to get out of the echo chamber of
For
people
sure.
minded, especially because even where we live, we're more polarized. Like people who live in blue cities and blue districts and whatever tend to be around people who are blue and people who live in red places and so on and so forth. Although moving to Newport Beach, I am definitely bucking the trend. I don't know. I mean, so I'll be honest. I should say have, we don't talk as much now that I've left Santa Monica, but a good friend in Santa Monica who was a fervent Trump supporter.
I think I know. I know exactly who this is, but remain nameless.
Yeah. So
this is almost, by the way, almost exactly why I asked you, because I know how like brash they are in their representation of their political viewpoints. But I also know that legitimately, like shirt off your back, very good friend of yours.
Yes. Like this is the person who, would call me and check up during the pandemic to see how things were going, to ask how my dad was, to, make sure things were okay, see if I needed anything. Like fundamentally a good person. And during the lead up to the 2016 election, we would sort of like meet regularly. We would get frozen yogurt in Santa Monica. We talk about politics, we debate stuff. And, you know, it was interesting and it was fun to share ideas. And we were completely on very different sides of the political spectrum. I think, you know, he was someone who had grown up in a very privileged background, who had not had very many bad things happen to him, and who sort of had the luxury of thinking that things like, you know, racism and sexism and wealth disparities were the product of a few stupid people who made stupid decisions, rather than like systemic problems in any sort of way. And like a lot of that was a product of having a different experience, not denying that those things existed, but just seeing them as being fundamentally different and the solutions as being fundamentally different. After the 2016 election, and with a lot of the policies that Trump enacted that I found to be totally abhorrent, and a lot of things that he said, this friend of mine continued to sort of defend all of these actions and a lot of terrible things that were said, and like actions that were taken, like trying to put a ban on trans people in the military. And, you know, doing that, it kind of happened at a certain time where it looked like it was in order to distract from some other political things going on. And this friend's response was, yeah, well, that's smart. And I kind of thought, okay, anytime you think it's smart to completely denigrate an entire group of people because it takes away from, you know, the focus on your politically unsavvy conduct, like that's just a mindset that I can't get behind, and it's really messed up. So after a while, we sort of got to a point where I couldn't talk about politics because I felt it much more personally, I think. And I couldn't divorce myself from that thinking, and it just wasn't worth it to me. Like, part of it to me feels like, you know, if you have a gay person and a straight person, and the straight person says like, well, I think all gay people are fundamentally wrong and going to hell, and, you know, they're mentally deranged. And the gay person says, I don't think that's true. And the straight person says, okay, well, let's talk about it. Like, I don't see what you're getting so worked up about. Like, these are not equivalents. And yeah, I think
So here's where I think like, here's where I think the true challenge lies within our country and within the world on a lot of things is, I think you're right. There comes a point in the conversation where you're not speaking the same language anymore. Yeah. And how are you to talk about an issue if you don't speak the same language? It's physically impossible. But I feel like so many people are at that point. And is it not, and I don't know the answer to this question, but is it not ever more important at that point to continue the conversation in hopes of at some point connecting? And I don't even want to say like getting through to them, because the problem is therein lies the issue again, because they want to get into you. Yeah. The same way that you, so like, how do you come back down to earth on something like that?
I don't know, because I also feel like it depends on who's having the conversation. Like at a certain point, it can mentally and emotionally cost a person on one side a lot more than it costs the other person to have the discussion.
You mean like in that instance, for example, his like, I don't get why you're so worked up, but let's just chat, is a very low emotional expenditure, whereas you having to come to that conversation ready to try to get through to someone who's like not even on your planet is very high demand on you.
I think more in terms of like having to justify your own existence in a certain way, right? So like when we're talking about things like, so one of the conversations we had was the increased incidence of people who just say like really kind of terrible racist or homophobic things since 2016, who say these things publicly.
You mean
And
in the political sphere, or just in kind of like
oh,
general conversation?
also generally.
Yeah.
So just like, yeah, just expressions of like outright racism and racial resentment and attitudes and things like that. Racial slurs being just like, it's sort of like the Overton window is shifted in terms of what's.
Right.
And this friend had his position was, yeah, but if someone has these thoughts, which I agree with you, are terrible, wouldn't you much rather know that people are thinking this so that, you know, you sort of know how to approach them or deal with them rather than someone thinking this behind your back and not saying it? And my response was absolutely not, because
Right.
I think, having someone say the N word versus think the N word, saying that it's better to have them just say it out loud so that you know where they stand and where you stand, that's almost like denying the fact that there's some harm that's being done just by them saying it, that in itself is inherently harmful. And so, I think like the example I gave with, like gay people are the worst and they're evil versus they're not evil. Like,
Right.
and I am not evil and I am not the devil. Like, you're gonna come into it with a lot more emotion if you're having to like defend yourself in your own existence versus
Right.
someone just sort of putting those thoughts out into the world. So I think, and that's not every issue, right? Every issue doesn't have people on opposite sides of it that way. But I think in those situations, it's sort of a lot harder for one side at times to like divorce it emotionally or divorce from it emotionally. And it's not, yeah, it's just not worth it. Like the level of emotional taxation that it takes on you to have that conversation is not worth.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to molest children, saying that doesn't make anything better for fucking anyone, right? Like, there are certain things that they are bad. They're bad whether you're psychologically predispositioned, unfortunately, to feel a certain way or not. They're not. They're net negative for the existence of everyone in the world. Saying the N word out loud is a net negative for everyone in earshot at this point, and that needs to be like a stake in the ground. You can't go to that conversation, right?
Yeah,
Like, what are we going to do? Talk about molesting children in a positive light so that we can get to a place where we talk our way through it not being good, and you come to the realization that you don't want to do that anymore?
right. Like, I mean, I'm happy to know if you were someone who spends your free time molesting children so that I can keep all children away from you. Like
Right.
that,
Call the authorities, get them.
short of that. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think you're right that like, I don't know how we get out of our siloed opinions. I will say when I hear people say politically, like the country has never been more divided,
Mhm.
I think I don't know that I believe that. I think it's more that like more people who are on very different sides of issues have a voice politically. Because I
Interesting.
like, like
You
we
mean
had,
like statistically? No, it's actually still whatever,
well, I think like
70-25-5, but
for example, which lasted for hundreds of years, we had many people who were like slaves and probably didn't want to be. Like that's a big division. But like they didn't have the political sort of like presence or clout or recognition to, say, you know what, I think maybe this 25% of these colonies who are slaves don't want to be slaves, right? Like
right.
it's, I think a big part of it is a question of like who actually has a voice and who's being represented.
Well, and how many voices are being heard? I mean, this is a big part of it too, is just like and social media is it's such an interesting thing, but like all right, if you picked up your phone right now, depending on who you allow yourself to be exposed to and the viewpoints of those people, um, you could spend 5 minutes swiping through stories and you could come across 90 different opinions on how fucked we are, how great things are, how good their day was, how awesome someone is, a promotion, getting fired, furloughed, whatever. Like, you will just be inundated with experiences and information that historically just aren't part of your day, that you would never come into contact in 2005 with 90 different stories about what people think. It's just not it. And so when that's happening and you are exposed to it, it definitely can create a false sense of how things are relative to what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's like, when they do those surveys and they ask people if they think crime is increasing or decreasing,
Yes.
like, generally, and people always say increasing, and then they'll say like, well, what about in your neighborhood? They say like, oh, it's about the same, or it's decreasing. But like everyone has this idea because that's what's important, reported on in the bigger world. Um, but yeah, I think that's definitely the case, for better or for worse. You know, like I, I mean, I think there are some communities that are like very small, very marginalized, and I'm glad that people have the opportunity to connect with folks they wouldn't meet in their, sort of normal everyday life. I think, and to that extent, it can be great. But yeah, there's some opinions I just would rather not hear, and that can sometimes be very close-minded. But I'm also like, I just don't need to hear about this thing today. Or the lack of social accountability is huge.
On what end?
That you can just put some opinion. People can post a comment with an anonymous profile, and it can be something vile and terrible and mean-spirited, and no one knows who they are, so they can just say their awful thing and ruin someone's day, and they don't have to take any accountability for it.
Like the anonymity of
yeah, like the trolls, right?
Yeah.
The like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter trolls who can sort of be awful people, stir up garbage, and don't have to deal with it. Or like on dating sites, I actually just put someone on blast in my stories this morning because this is like the 5th time this week.
Give me the dirt.
Literally, really inappropriate message from someone.
Really?
Very thing they said. Yeah, and like I'm like, I don't want to have to play, like angry woman first thing in the morning. I'm like, but I send my like lectury message and then decided to like post his profile on my stories and ask if anyone knew him, and if so, if they could have a chat with him about how not to send this explicit message to someone you've never said a word to before.
I wonder what drives that. I would love to at some point have like a psychologist on here, because there's so many questions I have about just like the behavior of people and where they feel comfortable being that whether it's who they really are or whether it's a version of themselves or the caricature that they embody when they're behind the veil of social media or apps or whatever that is. Like it's definitely a thing. I mean, there are like people online and in communities and on apps that are 100% not who they are in reality, because they would never take the risk of being that person, because horrible things would happen to them instantaneously. Walk up to any woman at a bar and say whatever the fuck this guy said, and you're getting dropped, I would assume, right? So they don't, and they purposely don't. And then I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about that. I think it would be fascinating to hear more. I watched that movie recently, The Social Dilemma, and I was just like, oh my God, I need to go to like I need to go live in the rainforest by myself for like the rest of my life.
Need to detox. And then I pick up my phone and like
yeah, and I'm like, that was the craziest movie I've ever seen.
Exactly.
Says sharing your experience.
We're all hooked.
Yeah, well, wow. I mean, we got far away from weight training, which is exactly what I like to do on this. I love when the conversation just flows. I want to be respectful of your time, and I would love to do this again, because there was a lot of things, honestly, that I wanted to ask you and chat about, and we didn't even come close to touching them. So banked in the future. But
anytime.
Yeah, I tell everyone this, like, how can people, reach out to you? Where can they follow you, find you, get inspired by the insane amounts of weight that you lift on a literal daily basis?
So I am on Instagram. I'm SmashBeFit. So it's it's been my handle for a while. It's always fun to meet other people in strength and fitness and interact with folks. If you happen to need a litigation attorney, I'm at Bird Morella, so you can also hit me up there. Shameless plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that'll be in the that will be in the comments. So if anyone's like, I have a legal issue and I don't know who to go to,
Civil, please. So your DUI is not my problem. I'm sorry to say.
that's fucking your problem. If you're getting a DUI, that's your problem.
Probably
Straight
all
up.
my problems, but yeah. So thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Ashley Smash Be Fit, thank you so much for being on here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.